Hello there, welcome to Planet America's Fireside Chat. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Chaz the Chidallo.
A busy week this week, Chaz, with Super Tuesday done and dusted, Nikki Haley is also done and dusted, and the general election is underway. We're going to be chatting with former Senator Heidi Heitkamp about all of that shortly.
And Joe Biden has already delivered the annual State of the Union address. We'll speak about whether he managed to do it without nodding off, falling over or flubbing his own name. Maybe he even did quite well. Maybe. But first...
Donald Trump is now the Republican Party's presumptive nominee for president in 2024. The third time he'll be the standard bearer for the grand old party, equalling Richard Nixon in that. While denied a clean sweep of Super Tuesday primaries by Nikki Haley's narrow win in Vermont, Trump has emerged victorious from the most lopsided contested primary in history. Although the tone of his victory speech this week was rather more sombre than triumphant.
But we're going to win this election because we have no choice. If we lose the election, we're not going to have a country left. And we're going to do something. Thank you very much. We love you too. And we love our country. And we can't let this magnificent, some people call it an experiment. I don't call it an experiment. I just say this is a magnificent place, a magnificent country. And it's so sad to see how far it's come and gone. When you look at the depths of where it's gone, we can't let that happen.
It was oddly flat and low-key. As for Nikki Haley, she didn't even give the usual election night speech on Tuesday, hunkering down instead with family members in South Carolina. She scheduled remarks for the following day, and by then the press knew she would be announcing the end of her presidential campaign.
I am filled with the gratitude for the outpouring of support we've received from all across our great country. But the time has now come to suspend my campaign.
And you might think the time had come for Trump to be magnanimous in victory. No, he was continuing to troll Nikki Haley on Truth Social.
Nikki Haley got trounced last night in record-setting fashion, despite the fact that the Democrats, for reasons unknown, are allowed to vote in Vermont and various other Republican primaries. I'd further like to invite all of the Haley supporters to join the greatest movement in the history of our nation. Biden is the enemy. He's destroying our country. Make America great again.
So let's summon our own magnanimity, Chaz, as has become customary. Let's get out the old Guess Who board. And there goes Nikki Haley. And so, Donald Trump, last man standing, effectively unopposed. He is the presumptive nominee, though, until delegates vote at the Republican convention. That doesn't happen until July. Other former rivals, of course, including Ron DeSantis, Vivek Ramaswamy and Tim Scott, all immediately endorsed Trump for president when they bowed out. But at least for now, Nikki Haley is holding that one back.
In all likelihood, Donald Trump will be the Republican nominee when our party convention meets in July. I congratulate him and wish him well. I wish anyone well who would be America's president. Our country is too precious to let our differences divide us. It is now up to Donald Trump to earn the votes of those in our party and beyond it who did not support him. And I hope he does that.
Yeah, and already the question is, where will Nikki Haley's voters go? Because she had more than enough support to decide the election either way. Normally, you'd assume her votes would go to Trump, but she pretty consistently drew upwards of 70% of her supporters saying that Trump would not be fit to be president if he was convicted of a crime. And it's fair to say that Trump hasn't exactly been super welcoming to her supporters. It took about 2 minutes for Biden to be reminding Haley supporters online of when Trump told them they would be permanently barred. And then Biden added, "You don't have to agree with me on everything to know MAGA extremism is a threat to the country. We need everyone on board. Join our campaign." But look, Biden probably doesn't have to try too hard to get a lot of these voters. Let's not forget, a lot of her support was from Democrats and independents, not Republicans, even though they'll vote in the Republican primary. Possibly none of her voters were realistic Trump options. Potentially. They were essentially protest votes. So they're like the uncommitted votes in the Democratic primary, essentially. Yeah. But before we move on, let's evaluate how well you think she did. My personal view is that I was really surprised by her being the last challenger. I never would have picked that originally. Not every Republican let's face it, was receptive to Nikki Haley's candidacy.
I wouldn't vote for a woman, and especially, Nikki Haley, I'm just going to say this, she's probably menopausal. We don't need that.
Okay, she said, how about we vote for people regardless of their gender, just the right person for the job?
Nice try, Fox Guy, but we heard the quote from that lady. But I think that the thing she did particularly well, which would have been difficult, was to strike that balance between actually running against Trump, which DeSantis never did, and the other Tim Scott never did.
Chris Christie and Asa Hutchinson did, but that was it.
But this is the thing: to actually run against Trump but still stay viable. Chris Christie couldn't stay viable.
Yep.
Mitt Romney didn't stay viable. Like, people for the last 8 years have done one or the other. She did as well as anyone I've seen in 8 years at doing both. Staying viable as a Republican while actually realistically criticising Trump. I also think that she probably dropped out at the right time. Not just, obviously, she was probably running out of money, and Super Tuesday, it's almost over now. But on top of that, let's face it, the reason her candidacy was still going on was because she was Plan B. The Supreme Court took care of that last week. Now, we have now got to the point where there's basically zero chance of Trump being disqualified in the neck before the election for legal reasons, because those trials just aren't going to be happening. And so there's no reason for Nikki Haley to exist in the Republican primary at this point in time. So she dropped out for that reason. What do you think? How well do you think she went?
Well, I thought it was interesting in her speech that she said, in all likelihood, Donald Trump will be the Republican nominee. That was faint praise indeed, still leaving a door slightly ajar. What is she suggesting there? That she still thinks there's a chance that he'll be disqualified by one of these court cases happening? I mean, what does she actually mean by that? That gave me a bit of a clue as to what her thinking has been, that there was a kind of a way for her to get to the nomination. Clearly she was in that same lane that Mike Pence was in, worked for Trump, and now want to be able to say, look, with me, you get the best of the Trump era, plus a throwback to the pre-Trump era, and you reunite the party around conservative values. It was good for Nikki Haley that Mike Pence flamed out as early as he did, and so that made her viable as an alternative. But yeah, essentially she was just there as a protest vote. Big question now is whether, in fact, if offered, would she become Donald Trump's vice president? Because she has said for weeks and weeks and weeks, no chance at all, no chance at all. Trump has said no chance at all, no chance at all. But if both of them are presented with polling that says together you have a good chance of winning this thing, well, it is possible. That was the argument, of course, that Barack Obama was presented when people were saying Hillary Clinton should be his running mate after the acrimonious primary of 2008. In the end, Biden emerged as kind of, Hillary Clinton in drag, an elder statesperson who gave Obama the gravitas that he was perceived to have lacked. In Nikki Haley's case, she's very ambitious. She's clearly stung by some of the things that Trump has been saying about her. But it wouldn't be the first marriage of convenience in a presidential ticket were she to join Trump now. Otherwise, she is positioning herself as the I told you so candidate in 2028.
It is true to say that even though Trump supporters now detest Nikki Haley, not one of them won't vote for Trump because she's his vice presidential nominee. That is true. So you can only gain votes. You can't lose votes by doing it. I mean, I don't think he'll do it, but there's no pragmatic reason why he couldn't do it.
Yeah, and honestly, for a lot of the people that currently say that they hate Nikki Haley, if Donald Trump turns around and says, this is a sign of how gracious and magnanimous I am that my former rival has become my friend. We've worked together before. We can work together in the future. She's a tough lady. I can tell you that for sure. But now's the time to move on. We saw him turn the page and make nice with Ron DeSantis very quickly, although DeSantis wasn't really buying that. But Trump was prepared to suck it up if it meant that it was more likely that he was going to get elected.
He's done it before with Nikki Haley.
Absolutely.
So he could do it again.
He has. All right, let's turn to the Democratic side. President Joe Biden won all 15 Super Tuesday primary states, but he too was technically denied a clean sweep in American Samoa. Biden lost to obscure presidential hopeful and Maryland-based entrepreneur Jason Palmer by 51 to 40. That is not a percentage. That is 51 votes to 40 votes. Fair to say that low turnout in American Samoa helped Palmer there. But that does give Palmer at least 3 delegates, and It puts him ahead of Joe Biden's better-known but still obscure rivals like Marianne Williamson, who is now back in the race, we think. We're not 100% sure. What time is it? And Congressman Dean Phillips, who got 8% of the vote in his home state of Minnesota this week and has now perhaps wisely announced that he too is ending his campaign. So I guess we've got to make it official as well. Get out the board again. And so long, Dean Phillips.
Poor old Dean Phillips. He's ended up with 0 delegates. At least he was good-humoured about it.
Yes.
So, just before he dropped out, he tweeted, "Congratulations to Joe Biden, uncommitted, Marianne Williamson and Nikki Haley for demonstrating more appeal to Democratic Party loyalists than me." And then he added after that, "Oh, and Jason Palmer." Now, you might be wondering, on Jason Palmer, how exactly did Joe Biden get beaten by a guy who CNN didn't even have a photo of? Well, firstly, Jason Palmer actually turned up. Well, not physically, but he campaigned virtually over there. Secondly, he blatantly lied.
You're probably wondering, who is this Jason Palmer? I've never heard of him before. Well, in the mainland, I'm actually very well known.
No, you're not. And thirdly, he actually spent money. $500,000 of his own cold hard cash, which doesn't sound like much, but he only had to win 50 votes.
Yeah.
So the question is, why would he bother? Well, apparently Palmer's stated campaign goals are to use his candidacy to elevate a conversation about Biden's age and the need to consider younger leaders. So I'm glad that someone is finally bringing up Joe Biden's age, bringing it to our attention.
Yes.
I hadn't even thought of that. Well done, Jason. But look, John, I want to go all the way back to Minnesota. If we could put that graphic back up again, the Minnesota one. Let's forget Dean Phillips' result. He's already history. I've forgotten he ever existed. Let's look at the 19% uncommitted vote, which is huge. Minnesota is a bluish state, but it's still within reach for Trump if Biden gave up, say, 5% or 10% of the vote to uncommitted, so that people staying home. Also, North Carolina, the uncommitted vote was 13%. That might be important. Massachusetts, 9%, probably not important. How big an issue is this uncommitted thing becoming?
Yeah, well, we can't say for sure what proportion of that uncommitted vote is a ceasefire vote as opposed to a none of the above vote. Minnesota is always a very interesting state in democratic politics because you have the very, very liberal tradition of Hubert Humphrey, Eugene McCarthy, etc. But you also have a sort of a democratic farmers movement as well, which has been traditionally quite conservative. So in democratic politics there, you've got this real left-right tension. So that 19%, well, some of them are certainly people that would have liked to have had a Bernie Sanders type candidate on the ballot. But look, for Joe Biden right now, the protest votes have not ever gotten within about 30 or 40 points of him in any of these primaries. Nobody's going to be paying attention to the primaries from here on in. So I think he has dodged a bullet there. But the bigger question is, of course, whether it's in Minnesota or Michigan or elsewhere, if there is a protest vote against Joe Biden's policies in the Middle East, this, in a close election could still make the difference.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the left-wing side of Minnesota. There's overlap between the left-wing side and the Muslim side. Minnesota does have a decent-sized Muslim population. Think of Ilhan Omar. Like there is a left-wing Muslim contingent in Minnesota who, if they decide not to vote for Joe Biden, that could cost him the election.
Yeah, but of course these ultimately are choices, not referendums. So Joe Biden is still probably going to get the vast majority of Democratic votes in the state of Minnesota. But right now, it is one of the states that Republicans are thinking we could possibly spring a surprise outside the usual 6 or 7 battleground states. But look, let's have a look at some of the other results in this week's primaries. It wasn't just presidential primaries; they were for Senate and down ballot. There was a governor's primary in the state of North Carolina. Mark Robinson there has won the Republican nomination for governor. Now, that's not especially remarkable. He's a lieutenant governor. He's now been nominated for governor. But if you start looking at some of the things that Mark Robinson has been going around saying in recent years, like this.
I absolutely want to go back to the America where women couldn't vote. Do you know why? Because in those days, we had people who fought for real social change, and they were called Republicans. And they are the reason why women can vote today.
Okay, slightly weird logic. He'd like to go back to a time before women were given the right to vote because he says it was Republicans that forced the social change that gave women the vote. And that is certainly factually true. Republicans were at the forefront of the women's suffrage movement in America in the 1910s. So, look, maybe he's not against women voting, as some have interpreted that as being. Maybe he just wants an activist Republican Party that favours social change. OK, maybe. But what about this Facebook post from 2016 when he said, "Feminism was planted in the garden, watered by the devil, and is harvested and sold by his minions." Feminism, basically the work of the devil. OK, there was this from 2017. "The only thing worse than a woman who doesn't know her place is a man who doesn't know his." And "I'm really sick of feminism and feminist, sick, that they are just as bad, if not worse, than racist." So, I guess, happy International Women's Day. Oh yes, and of course, he quotes Hitler. Yeah, there he is. And as Jen Bendry of HuffPost reports, Robinson also says trans people should be arrested for using bathrooms. He casts doubts on the Holocaust and spreads countless dangerous conspiracy theories. And he has criticised women who breastfeed in public too. Because, well, of course he has. And now, this man is the Republican nominee for the governorship of North Carolina, which is also a battleground state at the presidential level. And some Democrats think that they may be able to snatch it away from Trump in November. This nomination, they'll be seeing as a boost for them. They can say, he's an extremist, Trump's an extremist, we don't need either of them.
Yeah, there's a lot to say about this guy. We do need to watch out, though, some of these Mark Robinson quotes, because journalists love giving little shortcut descriptors of the offences. He's done this, he's done this, he's done this. They don't always stack up when you look at them. Like, for instance, the Holocaust denial one, we hear a lot about... I know you didn't use the phrase, but in newspapers they say Holocaust denial a lot. Yeah. He has sailed close to the wind a few times there, but probably his worst example was in a 2018 Facebook post when he wrote, "The centre and leftist-leaning Weimar Republic put heavy gun ownership restrictions on German citizens long before the Nazis took power. This foolishness about Hitler disarming millions of Jews and then marching them off to concentration camps is a bunch of hogwash." That sounds kind of denial-y, but Robinson insisted that when he wrote that, he was only saying the idea that it was the Nazis that disarmed the Jews. That was the hogwash, not the concentration camps bit. To be honest, I believe him because he's certainly not shy of expressing his opinions, even when they're very unpopular. But don't let me give you the impression that the hit list stops there, because there are literally 50 of these unfortunate comments. They go on and on and on. Basically, Robinson spent 10 years mouthing off on Facebook.
That's what qualified him to be Lieutenant Governor of the state.
Apparently. He often wasn't entirely serious, to be fair, but he was always saying things that were not ideal for a political campaign. Like, for instance, saying this about gay people in 2014. "Note to homosexuals, do not compare my skin to your homosexuality. My skin colour is a beautiful God-given attribute which helped my people survive in the conditions of their native land. Your homosexuality is a filthy abomination that satisfies your degenerate, unnatural lust." Okay, and I think this one was my personal favourite. "I don't believe the moon landing was faked, and I don't believe 9/11 was an inside job, but if I found both were true, I wouldn't be surprised." So that was pretty special. But like I said, he does sound off a lot online. I think that's part of his attraction to Republican voters, to be honest. Much like Trump, he's one of them. He just sits around yelling at the TV and social media, and they appreciate that. But then, this is him in real life in 2021, and this was just weird.
"And tell our enemies on the other side of the aisle that would drag this nation down into a socialist hellhole that you will only do it as you run past me laying on the ground choking on my own blood, because I will not give up this nation to you. It is not yours. You did not build it. You did not defend it, and you will not own it."
Now, look, we all know what's happening here. Democrats have one trick. They love to pull over and over again in election campaigns. They already announced that they'd be doing this in the context of the presidential campaign just the other day.
We've learned is that President Biden himself personally instructed some of his top campaign aides was to significantly ramp up the campaign's efforts to highlight the crazy shit that Trump says in public.
And they've played this game successfully in America and in North Carolina a number of times before. But the thing is, Republicans know that Democrats are going to do this, and they keep on handing them opportunities to do it again. Honestly, I don't think Democrats would stand a chance in North Carolina if the Republicans didn't keep handing them nutbags for them to point to. But even if everyone gave Robertson a mulligan on all his Facebook posting over the last decade, there's still one quote he isn't going to be able to run away from. This was in 2021 when he was a public figure and he said, you know, I ain't supposed to say this, but I'm going to say it. That's not a good start. I don't care whether you just got pregnant. I don't care if you're 24 hours pregnant. I don't care if you're 24 weeks pregnant. I don't care. If you kill that young'un, it's murder. You got blood on your hands. And then a few months later, after he said that, it came out that Robertson paid for an abortion himself in 1989 for his then girlfriend, now wife. Now, he does these days maintain that he would not support an abortion ban without exceptions. Ever since Dobbs, he changed his mind on that. And he describes the abortion he paid for as one of the greatest mistakes of his life. But something tells me Democrats aren't going to let him off the hook on that one, and I do not think he's going to get away with it.
Yeah, and you can see why he is being likened to Donald Trump because of the perceived hypocrisy and the inflammatory things, and yet the fact that he continues to get away with it enough to win the Republican primary to be governor of a major state such as North Carolina. It's quite significant that he has managed to do this. He does look as though he's shaping up to be another one of these candidates, a bit like Herschel Walker in the Georgia Senate election, that this is another candidate who is going to be very easily painted as an unelectable extremist. And his personality as well is not... It's more firebrand preacher than gubernatorial, I think, and that's going to work against him. So there will be a large amount of money. If the Democrats feel as though North Carolina is within their reach, and they have been thinking this for the last 20 years, and it's not impossible on demographic trends, then they may spend a few tens of millions of dollars on the presidential race, which could also help their gubernatorial candidate there.
Yeah, I think the money's going into this race here. By the way, he's quite eloquent. He's not like Herschel Walker. Yeah. But it's very hard to run away from some of the stuff he said.
Yeah, absolutely right. Well, joining us now from Washington, D.C. is former Democratic Senator from the great state of North Dakota, Heidi Heitkamp. These days, she's director of the University of Chicago's Institute of Politics. Heidi, welcome back to the show.
It's great to see you guys. It's been a while.
Well, we certainly always appreciate having you there, Heidi. I wonder, what did you make of Trump's absolute dominance in the Republican Party primaries this year? And was there anything more that any of his rivals could have done to have beaten him?
Well, unlike your country, we don't force people to vote. And so understand this, the people who are supporting Donald Trump are the true believers. Only about 20 to 30% in any given state actually votes in the primary. Who's going to be motivated to vote in the primary? The most extreme party loyalists. And so Donald Trump, and it's interesting, you guys don't get a chance to see this, but a lot of conservative news, including Fox, are really trying to subliminally send a message to Trump saying, you can't keep talking like this now. I mean, you riled up your base, you got your base there. Now is the time to show people you can govern. And I don't think he's going to listen because he's going to go with what got him there. But it's going to make for a very, very difficult campaign for the American people, if not for the two principals.
Nikki Haley in the primary campaign attracted a lot of votes from independents and Democrats. And in fact, she whipped both Trump and Biden in general election polling a lot of the time. So did Republicans just turn their back on a potential landslide here? Or do you think it was an illusion and in an actual real election campaign, Nikki Haley would have been brought back down to earth?
No, I think Nikki Haley, if you were handicapping this and she had emerged as their nominee, I think that the ability for Biden to get elected gets much tougher. In fact, on election night, I was offering some insights, and on primary election night, Super Tuesday, what we call here. I said, y'all are talking about what a big winner Trump is tonight. Biden's the big winner because he got, outrageous numbers of Democratic votes to come out, even though there wasn't a contest. But he's also a big winner because he got his opponent. And the opponent he wanted to run against was Donald Trump. Now, I want to just say this about Nikki Haley. She was persistent and capable, but if you said people were just excited about her, went out and, she's our gal. She was basically the embodiment of the Republican protest vote. And I like to tell people, look, if Donald Trump is in essence an incumbent president for the Republican nomination, and he was losing states or she was basically getting about 35 to 40% of the primary electorate, which is the most active electorate. And so these are all warning signs for Donald Trump. And that's why you see conservative media saying, hey, dude, if you want to win this, ratchet it back, quit talking the way you talk, and start behaving like a more normal politician. And I don't mean that by curtailing what he's thinking, but just don't be, tweeting in middle of the night crazy stuff. And I think there is a real concern, or should be a real concern, about whether Donald Trump can win in a general election. But he's also running against a president who is not very popular.
Senator, I want to ask you the question that I probably get asked more than any other. You've probably heard it a few times as well. Why didn't a senior member of the Democratic Party, somebody with a high profile, challenge Joe Biden for the presidential nomination this year? Surely the party could have done better than an 81-year-old.
Well, I mean, not agreeing to disagree about whether Joe Biden should have been the option, because we're all on the team now. If you're Gavin Newsom or Gretchen Whitmer or J.B. Pritzker, and I'm mainly naming governors, and you try and take out the president, the sitting incumbent president, you better win that primary. And I don't think they saw a path forward to victory. And the reason why they don't engage is because they want a future. In 4 years, Joe Biden will not be the nominee. And there's an opportunity for every one of them. But if they make too many enemies by, like coming out and saying he's too old, he's too old, he's too old, and then, weakens, and Joe Biden still wins, but he's weakened in the general election, that's going to be remembered by the loyalists going forward.
Now, Donald Trump has made very little effort to win over the non-MAGA parts of the Republican Party.
Not just that. He has said, we don't need you.
Yeah,
go away.
Exactly. But the moment that Nikki Haley dropped out, Joe Biden was trying to win her supporters over to his side. Do you think Joe Biden really does stand a chance of winning a sizable number of moderate Republicans over? Or do you think the Republican chickens are going to come home to roost and go back to Donald Trump?
When you look at the percentage of Republicans who voted for Nikki Haley who say, we think Trump's unfit, it's very high. In some states, as high as 80%. Now, elections are binary choices. And I think many of those people, if you asked them today, they would shake their head and say, I don't know what I'm going to do. For Donald Trump, his biggest concern should be that they stay home.
Finally, Senator, I wonder, on this International Women's Day, how do you reflect on the fact that Nikki Haley, obviously running to become the first female president of the United States, she's fallen short, at least on this occasion. Arguably as well, if Vice President Kamala Harris was doing better in polls than Joe Biden rather than worse, she could be the Democratic nominee this year. He might not have run. So how do you reflect on that and where women are at still just short of the top of American politics?
Oh, it's a long struggle. I think, so I'd tell you a story about the night Hillary Clinton, we went into that night believing that Hillary Clinton was going to win in 2016. All the tea leaves would have said that. I was nervous, but pretty confident. And my mother, who was on the vanguard of the 50s and 60s feminism, when Barack Obama beat Hillary Clinton for the nomination, she called me and she said, what do you think? And I said, I think he's going to be terrific. It's too bad about Hillary. And she started crying and she said, I wanted to live long enough to see a woman president. And it didn't happen. And I think, it's just a reminder of how tough it is. I think once we break the glass, I think things will be easier, but we still have the struggle in this country to elect women to executive jobs.
Do you think Kamala Harris's unpopularity is related to her being a woman, or is there some other reason for that?
It's hard to know. I don't understand it, quite honestly, because, number one, who cares who the vice president is? How come all you people are mad at her? But I think she had a fairly difficult presidential race. She came out, and I think people thought, she was the it girl. She, from California, had incredible experience and really flamed out. And so I think if I'm advising, and obviously that I know all these people, but if I'm advising Kamala, I say, you've got to have a theory of your case, and it can't just be that you are vice president. What do you bring to the table? And I think that, Barack Obama was able to move into that job with very little experience politically, but he had a level of communication skills that was unmatched, I think unmatched globally. He could captivate a crowd. He was, a student of every issue. And I think she just wasn't given a lot of those opportunities to make an impression. And so the first impression was bad. And in politics, that's a bad thing, to have a bad first impression.
Senator Heidi Heitkamp, great to have you with us for another Fireside Chat. Thank you.
It is always good to talk to my friends in Australia.
President Joe Biden has delivered his third and possibly final State of the Union address before a joint sitting of Congress today.
The state of our union is strong and getting stronger.
This speech was more than the usual ritual about how well things are going. It was an opportunity for Biden to reboot his flagging presidential campaign, maybe re-energise some supporters, allay lingering concerns about his fitness to serve 4 more years in the White House. So, fair to say, the stakes were very, very high. The elephant not in the room, former President Donald Trump, who Biden talked about often but didn't name.
You can't love your country only when you win.
Joining us is Lanhee Chen, former advisor to 4 Republican presidential campaigns, including policy director for Mitt Romney's 2012 presidential campaign. Lanhee, so good to see you again. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
First of all, what were your overall impressions of Biden's speech?
Well, it was an energetic speech, but it was also a sharply political one. And I think to the extent that Republicans would criticize President Biden, it would be for the fact that it was probably more akin to a campaign speech. Now, to some degree, all State of the Union addresses are campaign speeches, particularly in an election year. But this one had a pretty sharp political feel, to me at least. But the biggest issue for Biden in this speech was presenting an energetic front, a sense that he was ready to govern 4 more years. And I think by that measure, the speech was a success for him. I know a lot of Democrats were very concerned about the speech and were concerned about how it would turn out. But I think overall, they have to be generally pleased with the president and how he performed tonight. And I think it is the true kickoff of our general election campaign here in the U.S.
Chaz, what was your take?
Well, I thought the speech had a couple of parts. The first part was very much like Lanhee just said about the politicised nature. It's almost like we cut, it wasn't even a speech. We just, at the beginning of the speech, you start just attacking Republicans over and over again in no real form. It was like we just cut halfway through a bar fight with an old guy. Just going, and you did this and you did this. And it was really, I thought, unbecoming and ineffective and confected, I thought. I thought it was like he was trying to show energy by picking a fight. But then after about 10 minutes of that, I thought he then settled into the speech proper. And I thought he was much more effective after that. I thought in particular, there were 2 moments I felt when he was trying to genuinely persuade. And in fact, he dropped out of the speech at times to actually interact with the audience and Republicans to persuade them. The 2 areas in particular were about the economy and about how this was the greatest comeback that was never sold, I think he described it as. And he was arguing hard on that. And on top of that, he spent a long time trying to persuade people about his immigration bill and try and persuade them that, number one, it was a good bill, and number two, that he was taking the issue seriously. Now, I don't know if either of them would be effective, but I thought that he was in a much better place when he was legitimately trying to persuade people in that mode. What did you think about that, Lanhee? Do you think he was effective in either of those instances?
Well, look, I think that anytime you have a speech like this, it's really not about persuading people necessarily, certainly least of which are your political opponents. I think really when you get a speech like this, very few Americans are going to listen to the whole thing. Okay, I think only the political junkies actually listen to the whole thing. So it's really about, are there parts of the speech, are there elements of the speech that someone could look at and say, you know what, that's someone who I believe is energetic enough, who I believe is in a position to be president. And I think that there were enough of those moments for him. And I tend to agree that the sharply political discussion, the sharp attacks, probably not ideal for a State of the Union, probably not something that under ordinary circumstances you would want. But these are extraordinary times. And if you're Joe Biden, you're thinking about the fall campaign, and you're thinking about how best to present the case against Donald Trump, you're going to do it every chance you get. And there's no better opportunity to do it than when you're on national television with probably more people watching than anything else that you might do during the course of the campaign.
Lanhee, to that point, I want to play a couple of quick clips because I think given the different information universes Americans now live in, if you are a Democrat, you're going to be having a look in the next few days at clips like this one.
I will not bow down.
Where Joe Biden is looking commanding and defiant. And then, of course, if you are a Republican, you're going to be having a look at, well, Marjorie Taylor Greene heckling the President of the United States.
I'd be a winner. Not really. Lincoln Riley, an innocent young woman who was killed by an illegal. That's right. But how many of the thousands of people being killed by illegals? To her parents, I say, my heart goes out to you, having lost children myself.
And it's true to say there, Chaz, that in that moment, Joe Biden was a little bit flustered by that interjection, and he was looking around for a badge for somebody who had been murdered by an illegal immigrant, trying to say my sympathies are there as well. But I think you're both right that overall his demeanour was, my sense was, Democrats probably shouldn't have been too worried about this because this was not so much President Joe Biden as Senator Joe Biden. 36 years of standing there arguing for a particular bill, which he did, a dozen or more bills he was arguing for Congress to pass, and then shouting down his interjectors and talking to them and saying, hey, well, if you can vote for this, you know, if you don't want to take the money from the infrastructure bill, you can send it back to me. He was having fun in those moments. He was very much in his element because, again, here's a guy who spent the best part of 4 decades in that room.
I do agree, and on that note, Lanhee, I just want to know what you think about this. I take your point entirely about the people who are watching this, but there is one other group of people who would be watching this, and that is his own staffers and Biden's people thinking about the way they're going to approach this election campaign and the mode in which Biden is going to present himself. And personally, I think he's been way too cosseted over the first 3.5 years of his presidency. I think that's half the reason people are worried about his age. They just don't see him. And so it lets their imagination run wild in just how feeble he might be and frail he might be. But as I feel like in this State of the Union, there were a number of times when he went off script and he almost turned the Republicans booing him into a character and just interacting with them. And he stuttered. He stuttered the thing which they're so scared of. He stuttered a number of times and lost his way a number of times. I don't think any of those times was a problem. I think people can spot him that. I think what they're scared about is that he has lost his marbles, not that he stutters. And I think that in those instances, when he's flexible and unprogrammed and shows humour as well, he shows humour then, I think that is, personally, I found that reassuring. Even when he was stuttering.
What do you think, Lanhee?
So for a mode for the future.
Democrats have been thinking their secret weapon here, their ace in the hole is Donald Trump. Could it actually be Joe Biden? He's not nearly as bad as you've been led to believe.
Well, I think that, in some ways, this idea of the impromptu president, I think has a lot of merit to it because, it's very difficult to make the argument that someone is mentally incapable and yet at the same time, you've got a visual image of someone who is able to have retorts, who is able to respond, who's able to poke fun at Lindsey Graham, senator from South Carolina, as he did at one point. So I think that it's difficult, because I think that there were moments in the speech where, of course, if you were a critic, you could point and say, look, he didn't say that sentence cleanly. He didn't, there are things to criticize him on, of course, but the reality is people are looking for a human being to be their president. And they acknowledge that human beings are naturally, they'll make mistakes. There'll be times when they don't do things exactly as they wanted to do. So I think overall it is about considering the speech as a whole and looking at those moments when you could envision, could this person be president for another 4 years? And I think by that measure, there will be enough for President Biden and his team to take away from this and say, yeah, here's an example of someone who's ready to govern for 4 more years.
Lanhee, in terms of sound bites, I think probably his strongest section was the rah-rah populist section about make the rich people pay their fair share. We'll just play a bit of that now.
There are 1,000 billionaires in America. You know what the average federal tax is for those billionaires? No. They're making great sacrifices, 8.2%. That's far less than the vast majority of Americans pay. No billionaire should pay a lower federal tax rate than a teacher, a sanitation worker, or a nurse.
Okay, so now I know you're an economist in training, and I'm sure that you don't think very much of the economics of what he's saying there. But leaving that aside, as a political proposition, do you think that this is an effective tactic, this kind of populism, for Biden to be ringing that bell for the next 6 months?
Well, populism is very popular in the United States right now, and you see elements of this on both the right and the left in America. And so there's no question that those populist policy proposals, even though I think they largely make for bad policy, are politically quite advantageous for President Biden. So when he talks about the rich paying their fair share in taxes, when he goes after the pharmaceutical industry, when he goes after these elements of corporate America that clearly are not popular with many Americans, there is a bipartisan appeal to that. So I think there's no question that what the president is trying to do is to frame his campaign, frame his policy proposals in light of an electorate that really is very much drawn to some of these populist sentiments. And so, look, I think it was something that people will look at and they'll nod their heads and they'll say, yeah, a lot of Americans believe that that's stuff that needs to get done. Now, whether he'll do all of it or whether that will be the entirety of his agenda, we'll see. But there's just no question in my mind that the populist nature of what he said is going to be popular with voters around the country.
Let's have a look at a couple of the possibly newsworthy announceables in this. And clearly they seem to be very much targeted at political weaknesses right now. First, clearly Joe Biden wanted to announce at least temporary ceasefire in this State of the Union. He was spruiking it while eating ice cream on Seth Meyers' show last week. Instead, he announced the construction of a temporary pier to provide aid into Gaza, an important thing, but it doesn't stop the bombs and missiles from flying. The other thing he announced, Lanhee, was a $400 a month tax credit for home buyers. Now, that is potentially significant, taken along with college tuition fee relief and so on. Is that going to prop up, particularly amongst younger first home buyers, Biden's flagging support?
Well, the issue of his popularity or his level of popularity amongst younger voters, I think is a concern for this administration. It's a concern for the White House. And so whatever he can do to present policy proposals that speak to that part of the American population, whether it's assistance for home ownership, whether it's issues involving student loan forgiveness, which has been a big policy of his administration, I think those are all things that will be appealing to younger Americans and younger voters. And they know, the White House knows, the administration knows that that is a serious challenge that they're going to have to deal with if they want President Biden to be in a position to win again. He's going to have to win the support of a lot of younger Americans. And right now, the polling suggests that that's an area where this campaign is struggling.
Lanhee Chen, always great to see you. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you.
So finally, Chaz, any last thoughts or observations on what we saw today?
Obviously, take Lanhee's point about the fact that most people aren't going to be watching this. They're long and boring. But I think the important thing is, number one, there was no disasters that are going to haunt him. His delivery wasn't fantastic, but we know
Wasn't terrible.
that. It wasn't the worst. That's fine. And I think he did build a platform for the beginning of the election campaign that he can build from there, both in terms of theme and in terms of style. And that you can't ask for more than that, really.
Yeah, this was basically an election speech. Could have been given at the convention with the occasional heckle, which we're not going to see in August. But that is all the time we have for this Fireside Chat. We'll be back with Planet America next Wednesday night from 9 p.m. on ABC iView and YouTube, and from around 9:50 p.m. on ABC TV.
And do not forget the Pet Podcast and all the very finest pod places. Good listen. See you next week.
Bye-bye.